Just as in the previous question, we once again come to a type of question in which GMAT is just messing around with the construction of the sentence itself. Of course, there are some concepts at play, but once again, this is the type of question in which test takers would land on the right answer choice just by pure gut feeling rather than applying certain concepts. So let's try to discover aspects of this question that could prove to be useful in a different question. So I'm sure that most of the people who took this question ended up with the right answer choice A alpha. Good job. But you might be a little puzzled as to why exactly the other choices are wrong. So let's see what's going on here. So a certain alphabet was adapted from something which had been adapted from the Greek alphabet, which itself had been adapted from something else in the same century. One thing that can be noted is the presence of the past perfect tense here, had been adapted. So we just need to check whether the usage of the past perfect tense is appropriate, and usually the reference point for which timeline we're talking about is in some other parts of the sentence, usually in the non-underlined portion. So we can see here that before this underlined portion, we have had been adapted, which is in the past perfect. The rest of the sentence is saying that the Greek alphabet itself had been adapted in the same century. So if they're using the past perfect in this timeline, so in the same century, it would make sense to use the past perfect itself. And this which pronoun is obviously referring to the Greek alphabet. Now, what GMAT is really messing around with in this question is the usage of these pronouns. Now, these pronouns actually could be used for two purposes: the reflexive and intensive. Now, don't get confused. Again, you would not need to know the definitions or the names of these terms. You just would need to understand the usage of such pronouns. So take this example here. He baked this cake for himself. And this example, he himself baked this cake. So one thing to note here is that both reflexive and intensive pronoun end with self or selves. So how do we understand this difference? See, when you say he baked this cake for himself, now here this himself is a reflection of he. And this is an object. So whom did he bake this cake for? Himself. So when the object pronoun is a reflection of the subject itself, this is called a reflexive pronoun. But here you're trying to say that he himself did this. Now this pronoun is intensifying the subject, that he himself did that. Now the one way to differentiate between the reflexive and intensive is, if you take this out of the picture, is that going to impact the meaning of the sentence in any way? So if I say he baked this cake, nothing's going to change. It's just that we are intensifying that it was him that baked this cake. But in the first example, we have he baked this cake for himself. And this cannot be taken out of the sentence, because then it would be he baked this cake for whom? So to indicate whom he baked the cake for, we need the reflexive pronoun. So here the reflexive would be an essential part of the sentence, and here the intensive would be the non-essential part. So if you check the meaning of this particular sentence, this particular construction, it's saying that the Greek alphabet itself had been adapted. So a simple check is to try to read the sentence after eliminating this pronoun. So the sentence will read which had been adapted in the same century. And since there is no change, this is acting as an intensive pronoun. And you can understand that this is what the sentence intends, that it is trying to intensify that this itself had been adapted in the same century from some other alphabet. So that's why we can keep A. Now, if you look at B, this is the present participle modifier construction. And please note that this comes after the comma. So you should know the usage of the present participle modifier at the end of the clause, right? It modifies the clause and applies to the subject of the clause. But the subject of the previous clause is this which, this pronoun which is referring to the noun in front of it. But obviously, this adapting is not supposed to be referring to this particular alphabet. It's supposed to be referring to the Greek alphabet. And by the way, what does it even mean when you say adapting itself? It's not like the Greek alphabet is adapting itself. It was adapted by someone from some other alphabet, correct? So B does not make sense. That goes off. So the same mistake is there in D because it's saying the alphabet adapted itself. So this also does not make sense. This goes off. Now itself being adapted. Now this being adapted, once again, it's a present participle modifier for the itself. But again, this is coming at the end of the clause and this is acting as a reflexive pronoun because you can't take it out of this construction. If you take it out of the construction, then it will become being adapted earlier. So this is being used in the reflexive case, but using this as a reflexive pronoun is incorrect because the reflexive pronoun is meant to act as an object, not as a subject. So this construction is wrong. C goes off. And earlier itself. That's what E starts with. Earlier itself, are we trying to intensify earlier here? Of course not, right? We're trying to intensify the Greek alphabet, so E does not make sense as well. This leaves us with the right answer choice, A for alpha. Now I understand that this might have been a little tricky to grasp, but there are some simple clues that can be used to actually eliminate some choices as well. Because this is kind of a norm that you can see across a lot of questions on the GMAT. Now, mind you, I'm not generalizing this rule saying that whenever you find these words, you can eliminate such choices. But even during your practice, you can notice that if we have words like being or having been, the answer choices tend to be wrong because these words are indicative of passive construction. And there would be an answer choice which is conveying the idea in a much more straightforward fashion than using such constructions. So even by using such quirks, we can get rid of certain answer choices. But mind you, this is just a hack.